All right, we've been telling you about the 13 Russians charged for meddling on Friday in the election, now indicted by Mueller's special counsel. A move our next guest blasts as, quote, ineffectual political and a political statement. Here to explain, former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, who's done a great job telling us what's next. Andy, what's next? And what do you mean by that statement?
Well, when you return an indictment that no one is ever going to be tried on, you do it because you're trying to craft a narrative or make a statement. And I think what happened with Mueller's case is the original collusion angle that they were proceeding on, which is that the Russians hacked the election and that Trump may have been, or Trump people may have been complicit in the hacking, is something that A, they don't have evidence of, and B, even if they had it, they couldn't prove in court because of, the fact that, number one, they never even took physical control of the Democratic servers. They basically contracted that out to a DNC contractor. So they'd have a hard time proving in court that Russia even hacked, much less that that Trump was complicit in it. So I think since that's a big hole in a collusion case, what Mueller probably wanted to do was put to rest any claim that Russia hadn't actually interfered with our election. And I think this indictment is an attempt to do that, but it's far afield from what the original collusion allegation was.
All right, so there's the foundation. Why would you do that? To set up a obstruction case? Here's the problem, here's the obstruction, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of problems with the obstruction case, not least that he doesn't have a statute that applies. A prosecutor can't bring a case unless there's some federal criminal law that's been violated. And the U.S. Attorney's Manual, for example, says that a pending proceeding for purposes of the obstruction statute can't be an FBI investigation. So Mueller's been proceeding, or people who are behind the obstruction narrative have been proceeding along the assumption that what was obstructed here were FBI investigations, whether it's the criminal investigation of Flynn or the counterintelligence investigation of Russia's interference in the election. And for purposes of the criminal law, the problem with that is that it probably can't be the basis for an obstruction charge. Right. So you wouldn't, if you were a prosecutor, Brian, no prosecutor in his right mind would think he could indict the president anyway, because there's a lot of structural ways a president can get out of that. So I've thought all along this is really about impeachment. So
you want to just say, throw this, give Congress something to go on. So if the House flips to the Democrats, they'll say, yeah, I just don't like the way they acted during the election process, and we're going to go ahead and impeach?
Yeah, well, look, impeachment is something that the House has control over. The law is not. So, they can decide what a high crime and misdemeanor is. Right. But Mueller needs a criminal statute violation, and he doesn't have one.
There would be a problem with that. I got two other quick topics for you. First, on Kushner. Word is that Mueller's interested in Jared Kushner may be expanding into his foreign business dealings. As it relates to the election?
Well, the problem with this, Brian, all along has been that there's no limitations on what Mueller can do. You're supposed to have a crime first and then assign the prosecutor to the crime. Here, what the Justice Department did was assign a prosecutor and tell him, go on ahead and try to find the crime. So we can't really say exactly what he's homing in on because he's not limited that way.
And they've been pretty good at sealing up the leaks. Andy, your analysis is invaluable. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, straight ahead, a former college professor escaped from the PC culture on campus. Now he's telling it all. He'll be joining us next.
Now it's time for your news by the numbers. First, 75%, right there. That's how many young Americans are ineligible to join the military, 75%. A new study finding Americans aged 17 to 24 do not meet the minimum standards for enlistment due to all sorts of things, obesity, criminal background, or a lack of education. Next, 30 minutes. That's how fast Elon Musk wants to get people from New York to Washington, D.C. Half an hour. Washington Post reports his company has been given the green light to build a tunnel for a high-speed Hyperloop train. Experts predict it could take 10 years to build. And finally, $150,000. That's how much a Michigan inmate and author got as an advance on his new book of short stories. But now the state is coming to collect the money. The Attorney General says that money should be used to pay for his incarceration. But Curtis Dawkins, who's serving a life sentence for murder, wants to pay for his children's education. All right. Ainsley, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. In the new book, How I Escaped Political Correctness, and You Can Too, a former California college professor details her journey to leaving PC culture behind and writing, quote, I suddenly noticed my political correctness when I caught myself lying to my students about a simple matter of fact for fear of sounding right-wing. I also told myself it served the greater good, but now I saw that it served me. Once I realized that, I had a choice. You have a choice, too. Here now is the author of that book and founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, Loretta Brewing. Thanks so much for being with us, Professor.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hi.
Thanks.
Great. Well, so you had that aha moment when you were teaching. What led to that? What happened?
Many different experiences over the decades that gave me a moral quandary in my dealings with students. Cheating was widespread, and we were not really expected to do anything about it. And before that, I had a career in foreign aid with the United Nations, and there was a lot of corruption and bribery, and again, I was expected to look the other way. So all these things had frustrated me over the years, and yet this was my whole world. It was my profession. I was trying to be a good, member of a group that one learns to. But finally, when I couldn't deal with it anymore, was when I saw how it affected my children. And my mom genes kicked in, and I said, okay, this is not right. I'm going to do something else.
How was it affecting your children? What'd you see?
What I saw was, as you probably know, what it's called the Rousseauian fantasy, that children are born perfect and we just need to serve them and not have any expectations on them. This was sort of the belief system that I was surrounded by, and when I saw it not working, I tried to talk to people about it, and just nobody was on the same page as me. And then I found that other college professors were having trouble with their own children not wanting to do schoolwork. And I thought, wait a minute, we're telling other people how to raise their kids and it's not working for our kids? Yeah. So that made me decide that I needed to rely on my own judgment regardless of what the herd was doing. And that's how I effectively started studying herd behavior.
You said we need to take off the progressive goggles. So why do you think people fall into this PC culture, and what's the danger of doing that?
So that's what I was so curious about. Why would so many people follow this, including like highly educated people that I respected? And when I started studying the animal brain, I came to understand the real depth of our urge for a herd in the primal sense, in the mammalian brain sense, and in the human sense it's called a tribe. Now in the modern world, we've chosen not to live in tribes, and so our mammal brain has this feeling that something's missing, and we feel sort of insecure, and the more independent a life a person wants to have, the more they feel like something's missing. And political correctness is one way of meeting that need, and it gives you that sort of bonded feeling, so you always feel like you're part of something powerful.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us. If you want to pick up the book, it's called How I Escaped Political Correctness, and You Can Too. Loretta Brewing. Thank you so much, Professor. She's holding up the book right now. Okay, have a great day. President Trump offering Mitt Romney a full endorsement as he runs for Senate. How long will the truce last? We're going to ask former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. That's coming up next. Plus, it looks like a scene from one of the Fast and Furious movies, exotic sports cars speeding down the highway. But that right there is real life, how their joyride came to an end. Just ahead.
Well, it is a lovely day temperature-wise. It's a little gray, but we're going up to about 65 here in New York City, and tomorrow 75. in the middle of February.
All right, I'm looking at this guy. He's running to work. Someone's late.
Right. I just know all the cars are going in the right direction, and so is this show, which means it's time to go to Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, and a former presidential candidate himself. Newt, welcome back.
Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
First time we're talking to you
fun.
since the 13 indictments came down, which actually almost little notice. Next thing you know, Rod Rosenstein is coming out and say these 13 Russians were behind infiltrating into social media since 2014. What do you think of what has been declared so far, and what does it tell you about this investigation?
Well, I draw a distinction. I think this particular part of the investigation is very helpful. Mueller's doing exactly the right thing. And my newsletter, which will come out tomorrow, both at Fox and at Gingrich Productions, talks about the real threat from the Russians, which is much more than just this. But there's no question the Russians today are the most aggressive big country in the world. North Korea probably is the most aggressive small country, but the Russians are pushing everywhere. President Macron of France has complained about them. So I think we need to recognize this is not a criminal investigation problem. This is a national security problem, and it's ultimately going to require a national security response.
All right, President Obama expelled those 35 Russian diplomats, closed the compounds that were in D.C., we all remember, and then issued sanctions. But the current administration right now, this president tweeted, Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election, so why didn't he do something about Russia meddling, insinuating he didn't do enough. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think it's fair to ask ourselves, if this particular project was as big as the news media claims it was, then why didn't the National Security Agency, or why didn't the FBI, why didn't the Central Intelligence Agency? I mean, somebody's supposed to pick it up. So you do have to say to yourself, there's a long stretch in there where either the system broke down or we have a much deeper need to rebuild our security system. This is not about Obama personally, but that whole structure. You have to say to yourself, if it was as big as Mueller seems to think it was, somebody should have noticed.
Absolutely right, because look where we are now. Meanwhile, Newt, let's talk a little bit about this. There's a national conversation now about school violence. There's a brand new Washington Post poll out that shows, ask people, mass shootings are a reflection of what? Well, 57% say problems identifying and treating people with mental health problems, whereas 28% say inadequate gun laws. So it does look as if people, for the most part, a majority feel it's a mental health issue and not a we need more gun laws issue.
Well, my last newsletter, I outlined what I think is the only long-term solution, which is to have, depending on the size of the school, a minimum of 6 to 8 teachers and administrators who are trained in the use of firearms and have concealed carry permits and are prepared to defend the kids. You know, we've had this experiment. I thought the sheriff in Florida said it perfectly when he said, we've experimented with a gun-free zone. It's called a school. Every school in the country is supposed to be a gun-free zone. If gun control worked, how come it didn't work? And I think we have to be realistic. We're not going to confiscate guns on a scale to make us a disarmed country. And the truth is, sooner or later, somebody's going to slip through the net, because the civil liberties problem, if you go out and you pick up every person who's a little weird, you are really infringing on the right of people to be free, which is not to say the particular killer in Florida or the particular killer in Orlando earlier. I mean, there are people you should be able to track down, but it's not as easy and not as obvious except after the shooting.
Right, true. But there seem to be so many red flags here, and the FBI already admitted they dropped the ball. But here's an example of nobody I know watching, listening, looking at you are saying that Nicholas Cruz should have had a gun. But if his background check is clean, there's a problem with the background check. Don't you agree? Is there a way to weave in the police reports, which there were plenty? Is there a way to do that, to get that into the background check, so the gun owner doesn't feel like his life is ruined because he, on some level, might be complicit on this sale? So how do we stop the next Nicholas Cruz from getting a gun?
Well, first of all, you're not going to stop all of them, which is why I think we have to have some kind of armed defenders who are also school teachers or administrators in every school in the country. Second, I noticed that President Trump did strongly support what Senator Cornyn is trying to do.
Yep.
Senator Cornyn does have a bill which expands the gun check, and I think most Americans would agree with that. I mean, if you have somebody who is just blatantly, obviously nuts, they shouldn't be able to get a gun. This should not be a hard problem.
All right. Meanwhile, let's switch to politics for just a moment. We're going to put up on the screen a tweet from the President of the United States. Mitt Romney has announced he is running for the Senate from the wonderful state of Utah. He will make a great senator and worthy successor to Orrin Hatch and has my full support and endorsement. Wasn't that long ago, Mr. Speaker, that the President of the United States had some unkind words about Mitt Romney and vice versa, but it looks like everything's patched up now.
Look, first of all, Mitt Romney is a very talented, very competent person. He is going to win the Senate seat. He will be a very important senator the day he walks in. I agree with Mitch McConnell. He won't be a freshman in any normal sense. He'll be a major player from day one. Second, if you can take the Romney-Bush moderate suburban wing of the party and connect it to the Trump blue-collar wing of the party, you then have, I think, an absolute governing majority. And neither one's going to win consistently without the other. So I'm delighted, and I hope that Governor Romney is going to come to Washington with the idea that he wants to be a person who helps unify the two wings of the party, not somebody who's going to stand up on one side and attack the other.
And Mitt Romney sent out a tweet as well thanking the president for his support. All right, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great to be with you.
Isn't it interesting to see how much has changed over the last year?
Yeah.
They didn't like
Politics.
each other. Now they love each other. We were showing you the video of them eating at John George's.
He would have
Supper.
been Secretary of State. I mean, he was definitely a finalist.
Could have been.
He's
All
right
right,
up
let's
there.
hand it over to Jillian, who has some headlines for us. Hey, Jillian.
Good morning. A teenage girl once thought to be a robbery victim, now charged with setting up her friend. Police say 17-year-old Susan Mize planned a carjacking with two other friends in Texas. Those suspects accused of tying